to actually be able to take a moment and also reflect on your own leadership, but also come up with some really clear actions today that you can then apply immediately into your own leadership sphere or into the teams that you lead as well. Which I think is then a really good point and leads us right into the next one there around taking responsibility. One of the things that I'd love to share with our philosophy is our model around leadership and leading teams is we don't have to wait for somebody else to be able to step in and start leading. And then we've all logged in and we're applying our time here today. So for us, that ability to actually take that responsibility, take our learnings and apply it, we don't have to wait for senior management. We don't have to wait for senior leadership to go and do something. We can actually take these things and go and have an impact ourselves straight away. Which leads us on to also another acronym that we use here at Leading Teams, and one that I would be really keen for. If you're going to jot something down, I'd definitely be jotting this one down today. And it's around leaders being kind. So inherently, we want you to be kind in nature as leaders, but it's also an acronym for knowing is not doing. And so very much a Leading Teams approach is to roll up your sleeves, get to work, and get into the practical hands-on doing of leadership. Would reference that good leaders know what to do, but great leaders actually go out and do it. And so that would be the challenge that we set for all teams and all touch points that we have with leaders that we work with, is to be then, if we're able to identify some improvements or some things that we can do to grow as leaders, to actually then go out and do it. Anna did briefly reference the structure of this morning's session. So Jesse and I will, for the most part, present our philosophy around what it takes to be a high-performing leader over the next sort of 45, 50 minutes. But then we also want to make it a really interactive opportunity. We're going to send you out into some breakout groups with the various facilitators that Anna introduced this morning. And that'll be an opportunity for you to ask a question of a facilitator here at Leading Teams. So it might be something that you've heard through the presentation this morning, or it might be a current sort of challenge that you're working through within your own leadership or within your own team or within your own business. And so in those smaller groups, there'll be a great opportunity to maybe unpack and go into a little bit more depth and detail around any questions you might have or advice you would like to seek out from a Leading Teams facilitator. We would have just known before that message popped up on the screen that this session is being recorded. And Ad, I might just get you to jump in and confirm here, but my understanding is that the video, the slides we'll be using today, any references of like books or notes or things that we might get to throughout the day will actually be sent to you as part of our session this afternoon.
Yeah, 100% correct, guys.
Excellent. Good one. Just before we really crack in, I want us just to take a moment to sort of pause and reflect and think back. And Jesse, I reckon I'll throw to you as a starting point here.
Yep.
I want to take us back 12 years to the year 2010. Jesse, I'll get you to think about like, what were you up to? What were you doing that 12 years ago? But some of the things that I've done a little bit of research around this morning is a pretty pivotal year in some respects. Lady Gaga, Black Eyed Peas, Keisha, Eminem all had sort of #1 hits back in the day. We also had our first female Prime Minister in Julia Gillard, who was one that we went through the cycle of running through a few Prime Ministers at that stage, ousted Kevin Rudd. And for any AFL fans out there, was also our second drawn grand final between Collingwood and St Kilda. So Jesse, what were you up to 12 years ago back in 2010?
Thanks, Gav. For my memory, it was good to have a bit of reflection on this because I was in the third year of my apprenticeship. So today I'm definitely going to be able to share some stories around leadership or a lack thereof in some of the environments I worked in, the cultures I worked in. So working at the time, it was the year I met Leah, so a significant year for me as well. So my now fiance, we met that year. And then also one of the other big things I thought about that brought up a few nightmares was also the one grand final we played in that we lost as well, Gav. So some really good things in that year, but then also some challenging one as well. So, yeah, it was nice to reflect and have a think about that. So, what about yourself? What did you have for 12 years ago?
So 2010 was a pretty pivotal year in my life. So I had the opportunity, I was living and working over London. It was part of a 2-year stint that I'd done over there, and just a little connection that we have that I didn't know about, but it was also when I met Michelle, my now wife, living over in London. So obviously quite a strong moment there, and a big piece of history for me, but it was also my first touch point to meeting a couple of people from leading teams. So at that time, there were 2 facilitators who then went over to the UK and were looking to expand and do a bit of work into the UK market. Obviously, the expat in the Australian community being a pretty small one there, I bumped into them in a number of functions and had heard of and known of a little bit of work that leading teams had done, primarily through the AFL space. And so I just got chatting to them, and I had a bit of an interest around, what it was that the leading teams did. And they shared with me a couple of books that the leading teams has. They said, if you'd like to get a bit more information, it'd probably be worthwhile having a look through and a read through that. And I guess reading through those books probably gave me that real first impetus, like, hey, this actually sounds like a philosophy that really connects with me. It's an organisation that really values culture and leadership. And I always thought, all the way back then in 2010, that, hey, one day that would be a great place that I'd love to work at. And then it sort of became quite amazing that 7 years later, I had that opportunity to join the team and be part of the organisation. It was also my real first touch point to, I guess, the philosophy of leading teams and what Jesse and I would like to share with you this morning around what we would call our model of high performance, our model of high performing teams and high performing leaders within that space. So very much as a starting point, we want to make that strong connection for those who are listening in today that high performing teams require high performing leaders, and that they two directly go hand in hand with one another. I know that we're here and it's a focus around our leadership, but often leadership is around leading other people and leading teams. I guess, Jesse, from your perspective, if you were thinking about like a leader you admire, does anyone sort of first really come to mind that, I know you talked about your electrician apprenticeship and maybe some failings of leadership, but through your experience around, who's had a really positive impact around for you on leadership?
Oh, well, the obviously one, and it's going to be a few references to him today, and it might be difficult for him to hear, is Ray for me. So Ray's my dad and founder of Leading Teams. But I think just the way he exemplified leadership through times of pressure at Leading Teams was really exemplary. And the story that I've shared with multiple clients and continue to share around the video he put out to our team and around living our purpose under pressure, even though that while we were really unsure what was going to happen to our business, our first point of call was actually going out to our clients and making sure they were okay before we were okay. So I think just being able to really lead and act when you're under significant pressure is a really good thing. And also I think the other really important thing, if you want to be a high performing leader, is being able to show that vulnerability and ask for help. I think that's a really important part of doing that as well. And another story that I'll borrow today was around that Paul Roos one playing 356 games of footy and then saying that when he played, he never got asked by coaches around his thoughts around tactics and what they might do. And then you could see his coaching career was polar opposites to empowering his players to actually ask them and say, well, what have you got for me? So I think we're talking about leadership today. I think an important part is being able to actually ask for help and use the people around you as well. And that's definitely not a bad thing.
Yeah, awesome. Fantastic. Yeah. And in terms of, we hear a lot around that terminology, high performance. If you were to have a crack at summing up your definition of high performance, what would it be?
Around high performance, sorry, Gav.
Yeah, so how would you classify or describe high performance? What does it look like in your eyes?
Oh, well, it's just absolutely that action based. It's how do we live our behaviours? How do we behave, and how are we rewarded and challenged against that? So, obviously, as we work our way through the model, we're going to start talking about agreed behaviours, but high performance is really aspiring to the expectations that we have as a team or an organisation.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that, like aspiring to the expectations, and it's often around like a team's ambition. But the simplest thing for me around high performance is the difference around what we espouse to be and what we actually are, and how big or small is that gap that we have. My beautiful wife, Michelle, works for one of the big four banks here in Melbourne. And a couple of years ago, we found ourselves, sitting down watching the nightly news because they found themselves in front of a royal commission because some of their practices. But their ambition and their statement was to be Australia's leading bank, trusted and respected by its customers. And so in that space, we'd probably see, well, what we espouse to be and then what we're actually doing was quite far apart. And so often the things that we'll challenge around teams is, what's that bold, in many organisations, it might be a vision or a mission statement, whatever it might be, our aspiration, well, how close do we are that? And being able to try and close that gap up. But also, I think it has a really good link just to us personally as leaders. So what type of leader would I ideally want to be? But then also, how would I be viewed as a leader now? And how far or great is that gap? And actually having a really understanding around them, what are some steps in place I might need to do around closing that gap or being able to bridge it too. So what I'm going to get you to do, and now if you'd just like to move on to the next part of the slide, this is the first moment, just would actually take the moment to pause and actually have a reflect around our own leadership. And so if you're directly leading a team, or some people might be in here not directly leading a team, but part of a team or part of a business, what 3 words would your team use to describe you right now as a leader? Take a really good moment just to, really think through. If myself or Jesse were to go around and ask those people within your business or teams, say, what 3 words would you use to describe Gav? What 3 words do you think I might get back in that space? And the second part of it is actually to be thinking about, in an ideal world, in that future state, what 3 words would I love my team to use to describe me as a leader? And one of the reference points often used there is, it's around called start with the end in mind. And in many respects, I get you to fast forward through to your last day in whatever team or organisation that you might be in. And I know through my journey and my history, I've been in a number of organisations where you do the farewells for people. And in some respects, you're really sad to see some people leave. You've built a great connection. You talk about, hey, let's catch up. Let's, keep in touch. If you're in town, we'll grab a coffee or we might grab a drink, whatever it might be. And then there's some other people who you sort of like smile and wave, like, oh, I can't wait to see the back of you. And I think that the earlier we can get to some clarity around that, and have that really deep understanding and think about, on my last day, how is it that I would love my team to describe me? Because I know personally, when I get to that last day, I can't shape people's thoughts or feelings. That will be done over the history and the touch points and the interactions that I've had along the way as part of my journey. So Jesse and I are going to just give you about 2 or 3 minutes now just to actually pause and reflect and contemplate those 2 questions on the screen.
The first 3 ones that I wrote, I prefer the similar ones too.
just another minute or so. And Gav, the only one I wanted to add on to that one as well was just around that your team will be a reflection of your leadership as well. So I think that's also something to think about, is how are your team behaving? That is definitely has a direct impact of how you are as a leader. So just that's another way to start thinking about how I'm going as a leader as well.
Great point, Jesse.
Anna, did you want to just go to the next slide? Thank you. So as we spoke about the high-performing teams and high-performing leaders, but that next step that we talk about is a common purpose. So when we talk to clients, we talk about, why does this team exist? And in the time I've been working here, I know this is an integral part of our model, because if people have the clarity of understanding of why do we exist, so linked to leading teams, and the leading teams is we exist to help teams and leaders to become high performing. So when we talk about going out to clients, that's what we want to do with our clients, and that's why we exist as an organisation. So we're really clear on that, and if people are clear on their purpose, it makes it really clear for their roles as well, so they understand their role within that and get into that point. So you don't hear that language of I just or I only. I'm just an accountant, or I'm just an electrician, or I'm just a plumber. So it stops that language if people understand the purpose of why we do exist. And a great example I had of that is working at a water board, and one of the young blokes said to me there, we work at a government agency, and a lot of my friends sort of make fun of me and say that we're lazy and we don't really do much work. And I just continually asked him the question, well, if you didn't exist, would you be any worse off, or would the community be any worse off? And he said, yeah, well, taps and toilets would start to run. And I'll just continue to ask the question, well, what, would it be any worse? Well, yeah, we'd have sewers that overflow. We'd have sewage that flow, overflows at the farm. We'd have livestock that would die. And started to get him to think about, and then by the end of the conversation, we talked about it's a massive health and safety risk if they didn't exist as a team. So rather than him thinking about, I just work at a government agency, it was more, no, if I don't do that, it's going to be a major health risk to the community. So I think it's really important that they understand that part of it, so you don't get that language of I just or I only, and understand the importance of their role. So, Gav, do you have any examples of that the purpose of the real buying and seeing teams with that?
Yeah, I guess the one I probably want to really pick up on was where you're referencing like our purpose statement, but also a little bit back before you mentioned a video at the start of COVID when Ray jumped on and provided a sort of a guidance video for us around some actions that we can do as a team and organisation. And one of the key things that stood out to me is that the purpose statement doesn't come with an asterisk. It's not an arbitrary statement. If you use it and you really believe in it, it can start to drive the things that you're doing. And for us, it is about helping individuals and teams be high performing. It doesn't say like, except during COVID times, or except when we're really under pressure, or except if the financial teams can't pay. And so in that point, there's almost like a really good link to your definitions of success. If you are, it's the reason why your business is set up. It's the reason why you exist. If you can continue to really deliver on that, then in many respects, that is success for your organisation. And what I'd always add into there is your reputation that then sits on it. There's a really good one, like a financial recruitment business that I've been working with for a number of years. Their purpose statement is quite simple, but it's to align candidates' aspirations with their clients' needs. So you can imagine within a recruitment, it's almost like a matchmaking sort of type of opportunity. And I guess what could happen into a mediocre organisation like that is you just cycle through people, you match them up, you get the commission, you move on to the next person. But one of the things that they've been really good at is actually connecting with the story and the people that sit behind their placements. And one of the stories that stood out to me when we're doing a bit of work around the purpose, and I was asking the team, give me your best examples or your best stories where you've delivered on the purpose over the last couple of months. And one person that, or one example and story that was shared was a single mom, had been out of the workforce for a number of years, had gone for a number of roles and jobs independently, had missed those opportunities, and her confidence was really starting to take, quite a battering. Never thought be able to get back in and get some employment. And so this team or business I was working with, really invested time into them, saw a lot of the attributes, and was actually to then able to then place that person into a really good role. And the message or the reference that came back from that person was like, what you've done has actually fundamentally changed my life. It's given me some confidence, it's given me some financial stability, it's given me a feeling of like self-worth again and some value going back. And the power of that story to then say, look, we're not just placing people and getting commission off the back of it. What we're doing is actually having a real impact on people. And I guess for me, the simple way that just shows up at work is where people sort of come in and they're prepared to do that 5% more, or whether people just see it, as you said, Jesse, like I only, or I'll just roll in at 9 a.m. or I'll have my longer coffee break in the morning and I'll do my work, I'll keep my head down, and then I'll roll back out again at 5 p.m. that day. Or if we want to be a really high performing environment, then we've actually really connected into that purpose piece. And I guess the last point I would really make off the back of it is I'd say it's the fundamental responsibility of leaders to connect every person in their team or organisation to their purpose. And that each person should know that their role directly links to us being able to deliver on and achieve our purpose.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And if you're interested in continuing to understand the importance of that, a fantastic book is called Super Teams, and it is purely just writing up about teams, about how important the purpose was when they were under pressure as well. So they talk about Red Cross, Ferrari, Pixar. So it's a really broad range of teams, but all had absolute clarity on what their purpose was, and everyone's striving to get to that. So that's a really important one if you want to unpack that one a bit more as well. So
good one. Once we roll through and we've got absolute clarity around our purpose, we'd say all teams would then have two sort of main elements within their performance. It's around having the mechanics and the dynamics of a business. And as you can start to see there, a lot of the things that sort of build into our mechanics are our day-to-day operations, roles, responsibilities, KPIs, our strat plan, operating processes. It's often what I like to say, these what we do within our business. So for us at Leading Teams, we are facilitators that go out and deliver programs and engagements around helping teams become high performers. That's what we do, but also over on the other side, we have the dynamics within our team, within our Leading Teams, and we're like every other organisation or team that's out there, that we have a culture and the behaviours that underpin that point. Jesse, sort of in your experience and working with a number of different teams and businesses, where do you normally see the balance of where teams spend their time around the mechanics and the dynamics?
Yeah, absolutely. In the mechanics, especially if you haven't done the work in the dynamics, it's easier to go back across to the mechanics as well. And in particular, when you're under pressure, we think we need to do more work with planning in the KPI space, operating those types of things. But as you'll soon see when we unpack it, that if you actually spend time in the dynamics, it'll help drive the mechanics. So that's a really important link of the two. You can't have one without the other, but generally when we go with teams, they would be more mechanically based, and that's why we are in there to help with the dynamics of the team. Yeah,
definitely. And one story that sort of stands out to me is there's a business that I work with down in Tasmania, a large electricity company, and I was running a leadership program for a number of their engineers down there. And we've sort of been a couple of sessions through, and, you know, our focus had been around the dynamics and the culture and their drivers as leaders. And I remember some person, you know, expressing to me in the session going, yeah, Gav, I get it. Like, this stuff's all really good, but geez, we're just too busy. We don't have any time for this. And so I was like, okay, I'll have a bit of think through, and just decided to get a bit curious with and ask a few questions. So I said, oh, well, okay, you're part of a team. Yes, yeah, part of a team. Okay, does your team ever get together for team meetings or team gatherings? Yep, we do. Okay, good. There's a good starting point. How often do you get together? Every week. How long do you get together for? Or 60 or 90 minutes. Okay, great. I said, so when you get together in your team meetings every week for 60 or 90 minutes, what are the things that you discuss? Well, what do you talk about? What's on the agenda? And you can always see the person, like, their head just drops a little bit slightly. And there was that realization that, well, because we're engineers, we're really task focused, everything just goes, every single meeting is around the mechanics. So, you know, these are that task we have to do. These are things we need to get on with. And some of those meetings weren't necessarily super productive either. And I guess the point I was trying to highlight with the person there is not necessarily like every meeting has to be around the dynamics, but, you know, would there be benefit if we actually started to do a bit of work on our culture as a team and our work within that dynamic space? What if we spent one meeting a month or 2 meetings a month? Would that actually help us and have an impact going forward? Because I guess to Jesse's point there, he talked about, you know, if we can start to focus on that dynamics piece, it'll actually start to supercharge and help us deliver on the mechanics. Jesse, I know like culture gets bandied around a fair bit in sort of like modern language and either in team sport or around the corporate space. But what's your understanding or take on what culture actually is?
Well, yeah, to simplify it, when we speak about culture, it's the behaviour we accept within an organisation or a team, whether it's productive or counterproductive. And when we work with clients, we'll always say there's no such thing as a cultureless team or organisation. Every team and organisation will have a culture, whether it's a good one or a bad one. So, that's what we say is it's just the behaviour we accept, whether it's productive or counterproductive. And just linking back to that last point you were making, Gav, around that, well, do we allow time? It's that time versus priority. Do we see building relationships as a priority? Do we see working on the dynamics as a priority? And sometimes we need to be a bit more forceful and say that if you actually are going to be doing these things, it will really help the mechanic side of it as well. So sometimes it's just a matter of working out that it is a priority and it is going to help. So
one thing you mentioned there that I'd love to pick up on, when you said an organisation can't be cultureless or a team can't be cultureless. Give us a bit of understanding around that. What do you mean by that?
Oh, when we talk about cultureless, it's the behaviours we accept within that organisation. So from my first taste of walking into a culture of an engineering department, they talk about, you know, your induction, your formal and informal induction. And a part of that was my formal induction was going through the processes, the pays, the holidays. So really the tick the box exercise. But then my informal induction was when I went out and started working with people within the team. And within the first week and a half of working in the team, I worked with the senior tradesman who decided to drop me off to a shopping centre in Ballarat for 3 hours while he worked at his in-laws furniture store. So for me as a 17-year-old, that was my induction into the workplace. And from then on out, it was really clear that, well, that was behaviour that's just going to be acceptable. So that was my part of seeing what the culture was like there.
Yeah, great. That's such a profound story and experience as you said, one of your first touch points into the workplace. With that, who do you see then as being responsible for the culture of a team or an organisation?
Well, it comes back to leaders, but not just leaders. They need to empower people to take responsibility around that as well. So while it does start with the leaders, it's also something that we all need to take on board, and that's it's a part of building that the strength in the culture.
100%. Yeah, I'd often then like to reaffirm that we're all responsible for the culture and performance of this team. And so even within like, sessions or team meetings, how we front up, how we participate, how we engage, our individual behavior will impact the people around us. Where we would challenge leaders is to actually have that really strong influence around the culture and to drive and determine the culture that we want, or as we mentioned earlier, around what we espouse, what we really want to be as a team, to help get us that drive going forward.
Yeah, and I think you made the link to it before around we need to do that, but also leaders need to determine who the key centres of influence are in our teams as well, and making sure that they're on board for the cultural change and starting to build a relationship with them, because obviously they're going to have a greater impact on the team. Yeah,
because it made me think back, and you used an example before around, like, I mean, we said, hand in hand, like high performing teams, high performing leaders. And I was thinking back to a previous team that I was a part of, and I would have thought at that stage of my reflections, actually, we had a really high performing team. But when I then go back, I always sort of struggled with that part of the model, because I go, actually, you know what, manager at that time wasn't that flash. Like, didn't feel like we actually had a good leader. But when you just referenced there, Jesse, around centers of influence, what I realized was actually we had a really strong leader who wasn't officially the manager of the team. But that was the person. I would go to that person before I'd go to my manager for advice. And they kind of really set the tone for the team, and they had really great standards. They were really knowledgeable. They were really eager to help out. And so in the end, that's what I love around your point there, is like leadership's not necessarily just by title. It is actually about influence and who shapes the team and whose opinion and whose viewpoint do we actually seek out, and whose guidance do we go to that actually then has an influence and impact on us.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's a really important point. Is that next part ready to go, Anna, please? So I guess a part of that, when we speak about the dynamics, a really important part of that is building strong professional relationships. So understanding that the key language in there is that strong professional relationship, that we don't need to be best friends with everyone, but we need to have those strong professional relationships to build a high performing team. And I think spending the time and doing the work in building those is really going to be beneficial as a leader. And examples that I've got was really early days when I started leading teams. Jake Bridges, another facilitator at Ballarat, actually rang me up. I missed the phone call, and then I followed up with him later on in the day, and he just said, I've just got a bit of feedback for you. Your voicemail it isn't very professional. The language you use, the way you talk in it. And I just want to give you that feedback to have a think about it. And I reflected on it, went back and changed it. But if he didn't have the relationship with me, with the risk we run is he doesn't say anything to me, and then potentially I get a call from a client and they go, geez, that was pretty ordinary. So after the reflection of the feedback, I just go back and go, we had the strength in our relationship for me to give him that feedback. And I accepted that, and I made some decisions. But if we don't have that, then we miss the mark, and potentially then we run the risk of what we would say having third-party conversations. And then if start having those third-party conversations, we have a breakdown in trust, and trust is ultimately the major thing in a relationship. So I think that's an important part. And Gav, I think you've got some great examples of strength in relationships as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think by just picking up on your example that you use there is, in my experience, working with a number of teams, or what are some of the inhibitors or things that might be holding us back? And I often talk about like communication. And for me, like the principles of effective communication sit right in the base of the relationship. So your example there is you had the relationship with Jake. It was just easy enough for him to get on the phone or provide you with that feedback and actually help you out. And then we get to a positive outcome straight away.
Yep.
So without that relationship, the communication starts to break down. And so for me, it's just having that understanding that, hey, actually we want to have really strong communication channels within our team. Then the origins of that begin right within the relationship. I know Anna mentioned early on that my very first job was at an Indigenous health organisation in a place called Tennant Creek. So I grew up in the outer eastern suburbs of Melbourne. I studied sports management and marketing at university. And so my very first job was heading off to this Indigenous organisation in Tennant Creek. It was managing a sport and recreation facility. As part of, because it's an Indigenous organisation, I was, it's my first leadership role. I was 22 or 23 at the time, and I had to lead a team of Indigenous staff. And so here's me, I sort of had all my books walking out of uni, I had marketing plans, I had growth plans, I had all these great ideas and things just to crack into straight away. And I remember after like the first 3 months, like no one in the team was listening to anything I was doing, nothing was getting done, we weren't moving forward. And so I was really lucky at that time to have a great leader by the name of Barb, and Barb sort of just sat me down and she just said, Gav, have you built any trust and respect with them as a starting point? You know, people aren't necessarily going to do or follow through or listen what you're saying. You might have all the best ideas, but here I was just marching up from Melbourne and giving people orders, and no one actually following through on them. And so I was so lucky at that early stage to then actually just go, that was one of the best bits of advice I ever received, and completely started to shift how I try to see myself and operate as a leader and as a manager at that stage. And to now, what I'd love to say is I've, you know, built some really strong relationships. I'm still in touch with people, you know, what's that now, 15 years on, because of investing into that space.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And going into our next slide, that I think we're going to throw back to the group now and start to think about the relationships you have within your teams or your organisations as well. So what we want you to do is we want you to write down the names of 5 people who impact your performance the most. So again, that might be people within your team. It might be your manager. You can be fairly broad, just thinking about the ones that have the biggest impact on your performance. And we want you to order them from strongest relationship to the ones that need the most work. So who would be the best relationship within that 5, down to who you need to do the most work with. And then by the end of that list, we want to identify 2 of the people we're going to start doing some work within that space. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Just work your way through, have a bit of a self-reflection, think about who are the ones in my group that are going to impact my performance and where do I need to put the work in. Just another minute or so. Rightio. So we'll get back back into it now. So hopefully you've collated a bit of a list there. Anna, are you right to do the next slide? Thank you. Fantastic. So we spoke about strong professional relationships, and then also the other link to the dynamics that we have is our agreed behavioural framework. So when we talk about that, some people might say values. We use trademark at leading teams, and at leading teams, it's something that we take very seriously, is our agreed behavioural framework, and people live in it, and us rewarding and challenging behaviour against it. So it's take responsibility, show initiative, show genuine care, find ways to collaborate and live our model. So that's our trademark. And above that is also going the extra yard. So when we talk about behaviour that we want to reward and challenge and what we want to see as an organisation, it lives under that. And that way it's really clear for new people coming in that that's the expectation. And I think it's a really important part of understanding that expectation, because it's all good and well to say one thing, but then actually doing it is another thing. And I'll share a story that I had a potential meeting with. I had a meeting with a potential client. And I did a bit of research and looking into it, and before I went and met them, I thought I better look up their values, and their values were we work together, we act with integrity, we care, and we strive for excellence. And then before I had an opportunity to meet with them, I got an email back saying they were going through a royal commission. So it was pretty clear to me that before I'd even stepped into that meeting, that those values hadn't been lived by the organisation. And again, that's that part of our program where we're an action-based program. So it's one thing to say it, but then it's also another thing to action those behaviours as well. So it was fair to say that for that that company in question, they were definitely not living those values that they aspired to behave in. So it was a really interesting way of seeing how much of a gap it was for them, but then understanding how important it is to drive performance as well. Gavin, I'm sure you've got some stories and great examples to share around that agreed behavioural framework.
Oh, definitely, and countless stories to share in that space. I'll probably try and narrow it down. But again, one of the key links for me is that if we go back to high performance and we've got our purpose, for me, like the agreed behaviours or your values or whatever it is, like a code, different organisations might have different language, but it's understanding that for us, like behaviour underpins everything that we do. So any project or task or thing that you're working on within your business, it's underpinned by human behaviour. And understanding that those agreed behaviours will allow us to be a high-performing team, but also allow us to deliver on our purpose or achieve the mechanics that we're off trying to do as well. And so for me, they actually become a really practical tool within that space. And then it's been able to try and take them off the wall or take them off the website, that actually can we get to a point where we can review our performance against our behaviour. I had an example just with a team last week, and I just started beginning with them. It's within some work I'd already done within the organisation, just started with a new team. And actually, two of the different teams I just began with, one, the teams that they lead are going through some industrial action over workplace agreement at the moment. So actually, as we were in session, some of their frontline staff were striking that day. And the team I had in the afternoon is the leader had also just resigned. And so they didn't actually have an immediate replacement for that person. And what we did in both of those sessions was actually how do our behaviours help guide us through the situation right at the moment. And one of the things that they have through the organisation is one of their behaviours was better together. And so we got them off into groups. They did a bit of work. They both identified through the strike action for that team, and also not having a manager for the next short while, that for us, the most important thing for us to do was actually be better together. And then we came up with some specific actions that we could commit to doing around that. And so for me, it just actually highlights that if we really attach and we believe in these behaviors, trademark values, whatever they are, they can actually help shape how we plan and what to set up or how we want to act as a team. But also we can then review how we actually going against those values and behaviors. On a flip side, one of the roles I've done back in the day was I was working for a government agency. And I remember they spent a large amount of money graffiti painting our values all over the office walls. And one of those that's highlighted to me was stood out was communication. And my desk used to butt up against our state manager's office. And our state manager used to come out with lots of pride and say that he had a very open door policy. Mind you, his door used to be closed most of the time, but let's stuck on semantics. My manager at the time was based in Tasmania. And so I remember one day I had a question. I decided to knock on the state manager's door because it was directly for the state manager, popped my head in and I asked the state manager a question. He seemed a little bit perplexed, a little bit confused, but I just sort of ducked my head out and he said he would get back to me. A couple of minutes later, I had a phone call from my manager in Tasmania and he said, "Oh, Gav, did you just ask the state manager a question?" I said, "Oh yeah, I just thought I'd just go, just duck my head in and ask the person directly." And said, "Well, I just got a call from the state manager saying, could you actually go through the correct reporting lines, please? So if you've got any questions, send it through me and I'll send it back through to the state manager." And then I sort of turn around and I'm looking at the wall here, like communication is one of our key values within that space. And often I'd say to organisations, if you're going to have these values or you're going to have these behaviours, you have to really live up to them and act in that way, especially as leaders. Otherwise, you just run the risk of just really pissing people off. Something chronically. So that was one of the ones that really stood out to me. And again, one of my drives to come to an organisation like Leading Teams was, if we have a culture we espouse, how well do we actually go living it? What the behaviour we see on the ground, does that reflect the words that we have on a website? And Jesse, I'm not sure that we often talk about, people going, well, that's great, but as leaders, what are some things that we can actually do to bring that to life? And 3 key points that I'll reference, or a great framework for all leaders is first of all, and it probably just comes back to that Sports Commission story, is first of all, you have to role model it. So if you have organisational values or you have behaviours, whatever it might be, first and foremost, as a leader, you have to be one of the best at living that within your team or within your organisation. Secondly, we also then have the opportunity to reward people around their behaviour through those values. So if you see people doing really good things around their behaviour or their effort or their application, whether it's like trust or commitment or innovation, whatever the words might be, as I said, for us, it's take responsibility or show initiative, show genuine care, find ways to collaborate, live our model. We can use that as a framework to reward people and say, I noticed what you've just done there. That is absolutely awesome. The third and final point we can then do is, as leaders, is if we start to see behaviour that sits outside of that, we can challenge that. So Jesse referenced a little bit earlier around behaviour. Culture is the behaviour we accept or we don't accept within our team. And so if we notice something within our team that's actually not happening, can we actually go, I don't think that's the type of team we want to be. That sits outside our framework, that sits outside our values. I think we need to challenge that, and that's a key role there of leaders, because in the end of what we accept, in the end becomes our culture that we just accept and is a part of our organisation.
Yep. And I think that just links nicely to start answering some of these reflective questions again around some of the behaviours that we may be accepting in our teams and organisations. So we just want you to have a think about what are some unhelpful behaviour do we currently notice in our team. So think about what's the most important one or two that you think affecting performance, and write down a list of all those ones you're seeing. So start to have a think about the ones, but really start to think about the main ones that would be affecting your performance. So I think is a really important part we don't want to write big, long lists, and we want to try keep it a bit more narrow so we can start setting some realistic goals around, okay, well, what are the ones that we've seen that we want to address? So we'll give you another few minutes just to start to think about that list there.
One thing I'd just jump in and add there, Jesse, is
Yeah.
behaviour is not the absence of. Now that might take a little bit of explaining, but sometimes when I do this with teams is people will write down, oh, we have again, like a lack of communication or a lack of transparency. That's not the behaviour. So try and find what is the behaviour that's then driving that. And often around the lack of communication is we focus on our own patch or we work in silos. That's the behaviour we're seeing from one another. But then actually might say, oh, yeah, that's the reason why we have a lack of communication. So a behaviour is not the absence of, it's what we are seeing people doing within the team that's not helpful.
Yep.
Just give you leaders one more minute, finish collating your thoughts. All righty, and then just a key point, just as people are finishing up there, you know, an action there is identifying the one behaviour that you either want to address yourself or address with the team. You know, I think that's a great reference back there to the be kind point that we put. Like we've identified some behaviours that might be unhelpful or holding us back from being a high performing team. As a leader, now that I know it, what am I actually going to do about it as we go forward? So we've talked about having, you know, and the value of having really strong relationships within the team. Culture is a reflection of our behaviour. So if we're going to be together as a team, what are the behaviours that we're going to sign up to? And if we can get those two pillars in place, what it allows us to do is what we'd call engage in genuine conversations. Now, in probably really simple terms, a genuine conversation from my perspective is really regular, honest reviews and feedback around our behaviour and our performance. Genuine with, you know, there's a lot of opportunities or, you know, literacy out there that you might hear. We have brutal conversations, fierce conversations, hard conversations, difficult conversations. There's a subtlety but strength within the language around that so often many leaders, we don't want to do things, or just people in general don't want to do things that are fierce, brutal, fearsome, hard, whatever it might be. And that can actually lead us to a point around avoidance in terms of having some of those conversations that, you know, probably Jesse referenced a little bit earlier with Jake. For me, and that the specific wording there around genuine is a genuine intent to help the team and individual improve. And so part of that, if we go back to the framework, there's a lot around rewarding and capturing what people are doing well and celebrating that and getting people to continue and keep doing that behaviour because it's actually helping us perform well. And then sometimes we can actually find things or identify areas for us to actually get a lot better as a team. Couple of stories that stand out to me is at the beginning of the year and was doing a presentation to a number of CEOs. And one of the things that they were talking to me, or one of the current challenges or issues they had, was like, oh, Gav, how do we get a feedback culture going within our organisations? And I challenged them. I said, well, as CEOs, how much feedback do you get? And they said, no, Gav, I think you've missed the point here a little bit. Like, how do we get a feedback culture into our organizations? And I said, yeah, and how much feedback do you get? So right back to that role modeling, I was challenging them around your senior leadership team are in the best position to give you feedback around your leadership because they are the people who you are leading. And so for here today, to be a high performing leader, we say feedback is absolutely critical to actually helping you drive your performance. And so the more that we can actually step into that space and use it to actually help us get better, it also then role models the expectation we have for others and other people within the team. And I'd often link to say that, like, if you're not engaging in regular, genuine conversations, then it's very hard to consider yourself a high-performing leader. The flip side and where that can break down is, again, when I was working part of this government agency, it's about not seeing feedback as an event. So one of the things we used to do is your annual engagement survey or feedback for your leader. And if we go back to the relationship piece, at the time, my leader and I, or manager, we were completely poles apart, completely two different personalities. And one of the things that we decided to do, well, not consciously decide, but we saw that as a reason for not to build a strong relationship. We saw it as an avoidance piece. Oh, I'm so different to that other person. They don't get me. They don't understand me. And neither of us invested any time or energy into building that relationship. And so the annual performance review comes around and I provide the opportunity to give some feedback to my manager, and they get that through a written, survey without any conversation, without any context, without any delivery, and no relationship. Well, my manager, it's fair to say, was pretty annoyed and taken aback by the feedback that I'd written for that person because there was no trust or respect within the relationship. My manager saw that as a personal attack on them because we hadn't had any conversations along the way. We waited for feedback events to occur rather than actually, if we invested into that relationship, if we had some clarity around the expectations we had of one another, and we could have been engaging in regular ongoing feedback around some tinkerings that we could have made. So that if we got to that point around the annual performance review or something, then there's no shocks or there's no surprises that then sit then off the back of it. Jesse, I'm not sure if you've got an example or scenario where that may have been the case for you too.
Yeah, well, I guess for me, I knew the genuine conversation part bit was real at leading teams when I first took on a full-time role here, because I sat down and did a relationship assessment with Ray, and within that relationship assessment, it asked questions around reservations you have in the relationship, things you'd ask them to do. So it was evident for me before I even stepped through the door that we were actually real about having these genuine conversations. They were happening and we were talking about things that were pretty uncomfortable. But ultimately we were doing that because we wanted to build our relationship so we could perform the best for our clients and obviously continue to help our journey. So that was that one that stuck out for me, that, having those conversations, but ultimately it is to improve performance, and that's why we do it. So.
Fantastic. Yeah. Excellent. And so I guess in summing up, and Jesse highlighted a little bit before when we're talking about the mechanics and the dynamics, but in our experience, the mechanics is so much around what organizations and businesses focus on. And again, it's actually really, really important. It's often what we're measured on or what we determine success to be. But where leading teams will come in and work with teams is actually focusing in on that dynamics piece. And we talked about if we can actually build real strength, trust, mutual trust and respect within our relationships, we've got an agreement around our behaviours, we can engage in regular review around our behaviours and our performance and give and receive feedback from one another, then that will actually drive the mechanics of our business. And we have a number and countless examples around the teams we've been working with over the past 25, 30 years now that actually really commit and bed down to this model, that they have the success and the outcomes around the mechanics that they're trying to achieve. And so for you as a leader that we talked about at the start, the absolute benefit of this model is we talked about, how do you want to see yourself as a leader? Who are some people that you can build stronger relationships with? Is there any unhelpful behavior that you see within your team that you might be able to get to and start addressing? That you can actually start to get on that path of being a high-performing leader and engage in some of those genuine conversations straight away from today. You don't have to wait on anybody else. The benefit of this empowerment model is you can get to work on it yourself right here, right now. Now, what we're going to do is I'm just going to pause for, again, a couple of minutes. We're just about to head off into our breakout rooms. Understanding we've been online for just a bit over an hour. If you need to do a quick toilet break, I'd encourage you to take this opportunity, take this moment to do it. We'll only have about 2 or 3 minutes to have a break now, because we want to give you maximum time in that breakout room with your facilitator. What I want you to jot down, though, in that meantime, is think about what is one leadership question you have for a leading teams facilitator. So whether it's anything that's come out from the presentation this morning from Jesse or myself, or whether it's something that's an issue or challenge that you've been dealing with within your team or within your workplace that you would like to ask a facilitator, this will be your opportunity to do it. So if we aim just